We got like whaling or we?
All right, folks. We can get started. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Mike Cormier. I'm facilitator. Some of you I met the last time I was here, but I see some new faces. My purpose is to try to help us get to a place where we can move forward and we can make some decisions this evening. What I'm going to ask is if everyone doesn't mind, we'll go around, introduce yourself, and say what community you represent, or if you're on the board, or if you're a community representative, please, and then we'll have folks in the audience introduce themselves after that.
Frank Belduke, I live in Bethel and I'm on the school board.
Bob Lowell, I'm from Newry and I'm citizen at large.
Ronnie Deegan, I'm selectman from Woodstock.
David Bartlett, I'm on the school board and I'm also a Newry resident.
I'm Fred Henderson, I'm a selectman in Greenwood.
Dave Murphy, superintendent.
Michelle Brule-Cole from Bethel, community member.
Peter Southam from Bethel, selectman.
David Bobby from Woodstock, community member.
Marcel Pollock, board member from Woodstock.
Norman Milliard, board member from Greenwood.
Martha McLean, I was asked to represent Greenwood.
Wendy Hanscom, I'm a Newry citizen.
Can we just start with introductions in the audience, please?
Larry Merlino, board chair.
Jim Largis, I'm a selectman in Newry.
Gary White, Selectman Town Newry.
Bonnie Lodges, I'm the school board for Newry.
Alan Connors, a Bethel resident.
Ron Savage, Bethel resident.
Dennis Doyen, Greenwood resident.
Allison Aloisio from the Bethel newspaper.
Betsy Dorian, Greenwood resident.
Gentleman behind the camera.
Yes, Brooks Morton from Western Hills Access Television.
Okay. All right, so I have just a couple of basic rules. One is that we're here to have a civil conversation. I don't believe there's any reason we wouldn't have a civil conversation, but for everyone to be able to express their opinion and share, any concerns or any questions that they might have. This evening, we'll try to keep it moving forward, so we're out of here at a reasonable time. It's a little bit different in that we're here this evening due to a petition being circulated that requested that the committee be reformed again to talk about perhaps a change in the funding formula. So, SAD 44 or RSU 44, whichever name pleases you, functions under a special purpose law. You are not, the way you fund your education program actually was set out in statute by the legislature in, I think, Set 6 and 44 were the two that an exception was made for. And I'm going to ask Dave if he wouldn't mind just sharing that,
Sure.
what the difference is, please.
Back in 2005, the state introduced a change in the way that schools were funded and using a combination of pupil enrollment from different towns and valuation, state valuations. And at that point in time, SAD 44 and SAD 6 were excluded because the property valuations were so extreme that the impact on the district would have been significant, and the legislature, and Bruce Bryant was the senator at the time, I think, who was the most actively involved in that. John Patrick, I think, was the state rep who represented most of SAD 44. That was a very, I believe from what I recall, it came up as an item like in November maybe of 2004 or 5, and then was actually came to conclusion, I think in January, the following January, so it was a fairly brief time frame. But in that process, the legislature did make exceptions for SAD 44 and SAD 6, saying they would retain the same format for funding education as they had prior to the change in the law.
Any questions about that?
So that, what did that change in the law say for everyone else?
Well, it moved towards a funding level that would be based on student population for the amount of money that, you can jump into, Mike, the way that it impacted your required local share. And you have two components of funding educational budgets. One is your required local, which is the money you have to raise in order to get state aid. And then you have the additional local, which is the amount that is raised above your required. And my understanding of it, and again, it doesn't really apply to us, so I haven't familiarized myself with it all that much, but my understanding is that the law impacted primarily the required local funding, and that the additional local remained the same as whatever it had been prior to the change in the law. Is that correct, Mike?
So, two things I passed out. The first one, the second one that does not have the colored highlights, that's actually a copy of the special purpose law, so that you just have the language right in there. You will notice the mention of SAD 44 and SAD 6. So we wanted you to have a copy of the language so you have it for your records. If anyone asks a question about that. The other one with the highlights on it, we'll talk about the process to change the amendment of what's called the cost-sharing formula. And I apologize because some of this color, I don't know, I got carried away with highlighting. But it basically allows a committee such as this to recommend a change in how the funding would be allocated to the communities. And the process, actually, under A, you can see if 10% of the voters, and there's a petition, then that committee needs to be formed, or the majority of the board could choose to form a committee. I think this is number 3, third time?
Correct.
Each member municipality has to be represented at the meeting, and we're here to have that completely covered this evening. Prior to the first meeting, the district shall engage the services of a facilitator. Hello, got that taken care of. At the first meeting, review and present information pertaining to the sharing of costs with the district, description of the cost-sharing method, etc. We're not going to go into a lot of historical detail. I think when Jake worked with the first committee, Jake Crocodile, he spent a lot of time on that. The last time we met, really, the selectmen and some of the town managers had gotten together and had come up with what they thought would be a process of changing the funding cost-sharing formula that would be acceptable to the communities. But I have information for you on that, updated from the last time we met, because we're in the current school year, we kind of know what the figures are going to look like for next year, although the legislature, if you haven't followed it in the paper, did not vote to approve the funding for schools before they adjourned. So a bit of a limbo there, and I'm glad to be a retired superintendent of schools when those types of things happen. It says develop a plan of action for consideration. A change in method of sharing costs may only be approved by a majority vote of the folks on this committee. And if a change in, and then down to the D, yellow down towards the bottom, if a change in cost-sharing method is approved by a majority of the folks at this on this committee, the change must be submitted to the voters at a district meeting, becomes effective by approval, and it actually has to go to a district referendum. So that is the language with regards to changes. I just, again, want you to have it. Somebody might ask you about it, but at least have a copy of it. Yes?
I would like to discuss the goal and the agenda.
Yep.
The goal, as is written out, says to create an alternative district cost-sharing formula for taxpayers' consideration vote. The law, 1301, if you go to 3 and you go to about 5 or 6 sentences down, the goal of this meeting is to reconsider the method of sharing costs, to reconsider, to think again about how to do this. Now, I participated in the first cost sharing meeting. I did not participate in the second one. There are some people here who I think who may have been here for all three. There are some people who have never been here and who have maybe little knowledge of what's going on. So I think it's the first thing to do is to clarify the goal. The goal tonight is not to approve a cost-sharing plan, it's to reconsider it. Okay, that's important, because I don't think we need to rush through this. And one of the things I think it's important for people to approve the agenda, and I agree with you that we're going to be civil, but there are some sort of basic rules of engagement that I think we need to decide in terms of meetings and things like that, content. And then the one thing that's really, I think, missing significantly in the agenda is essentially the withdrawal history. We're here because of the withdrawal process. This group is tasked with, once again, trying to find a solution to what's been going on for 3 years that's been very unpleasant for everybody. And I take my job seriously, I think everybody here does. And I think we owe it to the voters to really be thoughtful about what we're doing, to understand why we're here, and to have everybody on this group be at the same level of understanding about the history. So I don't want to rush through this, and I'll see how other people feel, but I think the first step is to agree on the goal and to go back to so I'd like to make a motion that the goal be revised to represent what is in 1301. 3, amendment of cost-sharing formulas. The Board of Directors, the motion would be the Board of Directors shall hold at least one meeting of municipal, the goal should be to reconsider the method of sharing costs. So I'd like to have that motion considered, please.
Second,
Second.
discussion?
Marcel, what paragraph is that? I see
Okay, so it's
3.
3,
Yeah.
under amendment of cost-sharing
I see that,
formulas.
yep.
Go down about 1, 2,
3A.
3, 4, 5, 6 sentences. That's what our charge is, to reconsider.
Reconsider, yep.
No discussion?
So Marcel, what's the difference between that and what's here now?
Well, what's saying here, and it's basically creating an it's already assuming that we are going to create a cost-sharing formula. That's the assumption implied in that goal, and that's not what the law is saying. We are supposed to reconsider. One scenario, maybe we do change it. One scenario, maybe we say the current law and the process is fair. That is what this committee is tasked with, not to automatically create a new cost-sharing formula.
Any other questions? Those in favor of amending the goal, please signify. Opposed? 7 for abstentions?
Who voted no? I'm sorry. Peter?
And Fred abstained. Great.
And again, I would like another motion to include somewhere in here I hate to put this task on Dr. Murphy, but it would probably fall to him, a withdrawal history of withdrawal. Summary history of withdrawal.
I have no objections to that at all, and be happy just to ask Dr. Murphy if he would just be willing to do that. So we make sure everybody's on the same page. I don't know, we don't need to, we'll just do it.
About 100 years ago, this process started several years ago. each time I read about it, it seems to be extended a little bit, maybe beyond what it really has been, but it's been at least 3 years. And it's been a process that was initiated by a request from Newry, and they formed a withdrawal committee. And over the course of probably the first year and a half, we had conversations back and forth about different proposals, different plans have been put forth, discussion back and forth. Neither side could come to any kind of an agreement on that. We ended up going to mediation. It was not a required mediation, but it was a mediation session that was held using a hired mediator. The cost for that was split between the Newry Withdrawal Committee and SAD 44. We had some meetings with the mediator, and nothing came of that either. During the process, there were multiple trips from really all parties to Augusta to talk to the Education Committee, to lobby one way or the other towards approval of laws or helping people to try to understand both sides of the issue. At one point, we also worked with a group a lobbyist to try to help us get the message out there. We didn't do that extensively and ended up really doing most of that ourselves. And I think at one point, and throughout the process, every time, I think it was 90 days that went by, we had to request an extension. And so we've had multiple extensions. I don't know the exact number right off the top. Somebody in the audience might remember, but 9 or 10 probably extensions. And we haven't been able to come to a conclusion. And so as a result of trying to move the ball forward, if you will, the board did vote back a year and a half ago or so, a year ago, to form a cost-sharing committee. Maybe it was even longer than that now, with Jake as the facilitator. And we put forward an option for voters to consider. That was voted down fairly handily. Then again, last November, a second cost-sharing proposal went out to the voters. That basically took the same idea that had been presented the first time around, but expanded the number of years where implementation would take place to 8. And that was also voted down, but by 19 votes. And so the board was asked to again consider forming a cost-sharing committee to look at the issue again. The board voted not to go that route back in February. And at that point, petition kicked in, and enough signatures were gathered and presented to the board, which required the board to go ahead and form this third committee. And so that's kind of where we are today. Throughout the whole process, I think it's been difficult, and I'll just speak I'll try to speak from both sides, but Newry certainly was feeling as though by not being part of the agreed to change in the formula back in 2005, that they were being asked to fund a significant share of the school budget that they might not normally be sharing if they were in any other school district. The board members on the committee, I think, and again, not to speak for everybody, but I think the feeling was this was a fair way to go, and the legislature had supported that. And they also, I think, felt as though for them to make a decision on their own that would impact the other towns would not be an appropriate one, and would likely also result in the school budget, our ability to fund the schools, be impacted if they made a decision without input from the communities. And so I think what ended up happening was the cost-sharing committee alleviated that situation in that it represents, people from the general public from each of the 4 towns as well as board members. So I think that's how we got here today. Certainly there have been a lot of other zigs and zags through that whole process. That certainly doesn't summarize everything that happened over the course of time. But there were, several exchanges back and forth, and it was pretty clear that we weren't making enough progress. And that's why we attempted to go to mediation, and that didn't result in any kind of final decision either, so back at it.
May I just add a few things? Thank you.
Please, no, go ahead.
We'll hire you to do cliff notes.
Yeah, thanks.
You did a very good job. I just wanted to add a few points that are important. There have been lots of legislative efforts along the way, and on both sides, to try to seek legislative justice or relief from this. And the latest one was 1336, which would have forced, in situations like this where the negotiations are stalled, it would force binding mediation on the parties. And that would have meant that, in this case, we would have been forced to do binding mediation. That effort failed in the legislature this year. It passed in the House with the amendment, but failed in the Senate, went back to the House, it failed. So for this year, it's done. I certainly can't predict what is going to happen next year. Likely there will be additional efforts, but for this year, it's done. So there is no imminent threat coming from the legislature. That's really important, because I think part of the timing of this petition effort was legitimately to consider what would happen if withdrawal did happen and the extraordinary impact. And I certainly respect the business people who showed up and explained how it would really impact them. So that's important to understand, that that's not a threat right now. We're not under that threat. The other thing that I think is important to understand is it was a modest effort, but I think it was a significant effort. One of the concerns of NURI was that they were not adequately represented on the board. And because of our weighted system, they had 2 votes, and their votes, I think, were 29 each, which was not fair.
6% of the total.
6% of the total. And so the board chose, without asking for anything in return, the board did the right thing and essentially changed the process so that now, currently, NURI has 3 representatives, and as of July 1st, there will be no more weighted votes. So Woodstock, NURI will have 3 representatives to match Woodstock's at 3, Greenwood's at 3, and Bethel at 6. And that's important because it basically allows NURI to have equal representation to the other 2 towns.
And just as a, and thank you for bringing that up, that was definitely an important component. And that decision was really made as a result of a committee very similar to this, the reapportionment committee, that sat down and basically came to agreement that people all felt that would be a reasonable reallocation, if you will, or reapportionment of the board. That did not require a referendum vote on the part of the community. It went right from that committee directly to the commissioner, who approved the reapportionment. And that goes into effect, I think, as Marcel said, July 1st.
That was not unanimous, so.
It was not unanimous.
I think a point of order may be in order here. David, could you read, we're here tonight because of the petition of which I'm one. Could we read the top of the petition, please?
Well, the top is the directions on what has to happen. You want me to read the language of the petition?
Of the petition, yes, please.
We, the undersigned qualified voters in Maine, qualified to vote in the affairs of Maine School Administrative District Number 44, hereby request that the Board of Directors of MSAD 44 call a meeting of the municipal representatives pursuant to Section 1301 of Title 28 of the Maine Revised Statutes as amended for the purpose of reconsidering the manner of sharing costs in MSAD 44.
And then I just as another point of order, I want to make sure that it seems like there was just a vote taken to amend 1301. You're reading off 1301, and I think, Marcel, if I read your amendment, or your vote that you had a few minutes ago, are we changing the language in 1301? No. We're not.
No. What he wanted to do is change the goal at the top of the agenda. The goal at the top of the agenda said to create an alternative district cost-sharing formula for taxpayer consideration. What the goal is to consider looking at the cost-sharing formula. really follows the language of the petition.
Perfect, thank you very much. You answered
You're
the
very
question.
welcome.
Thank you.
And I apologize, we didn't make enough copies, didn't know how many people were gonna have in the audience, so I'm sorry if we don't have enough copies for everyone to have.
Good one. Thank you, I'm all set.
All right, we all set on the, does that help everyone have the background and the history? All right, so if I'm looking at the agenda, we're down to item, that was item 5. Failed attempts, 2016-17. The only piece I would add about failed attempts was, first failed attempt was to sort of move pretty quickly, like in a 2 or 3 year, I have that language somewhere, 3-year process to get to 85-15. And that, folks, pretty soundly rejected in the vote. The last one was to do it over an 8-year period with a variety of steps along the way to transition. And that was the one that Dr. Murphy mentioned. It was 19 votes. And I think that was the one that also then caused folks to create a petition saying it was pretty close and go back. So the purpose tonight, you can leave it the way it is. You know, after we finish discussion, you can come up with an alternative. I mean, it's really up to the committee to decide the direction, and it will be a majority vote. It does not require a unanimous vote for something to be moved forward with regards to what happens this evening as such. What I would like to do next is to talk about valuation, because that's sort of the big bugaboo in the whole process. So one of the things I have Yeah, not any of these things were attached to your agenda. Felt it was important that you have as much of the material ahead of time if you wanted to look at it before you came to tonight's meeting. This this valuation is not the valuation that the selectmen in your towns have. They set their valuation. This is valuation that is in fact done by the Maine Revenue Service. I'll have that department name exactly right. Yeah. And I'll just say to you with regards to that is actually, it's based on sale of property within a community. And what they look at, they throw out what we call the outliers, the really high, the really low, and they come up with an average, and then they take a look at the valuation of the community. They also look at what the town selectmen have on the books that the town council has to see what the discrepancy is. And I can't tell you if it exceeds a certain percentage, they expect the town to get a revaluation done. So this just shows you, I highlighted the towns in the district. There's a history here going back to 2006. So you can take a look at that sheet and you can go back and see what the valuations were. Now, one of the things that I don't want to forget to mention, the state, in the funding piece, they're doing something now called fiscal capacity. They don't use annual valuation. For next year, they're using 2 years' worth. I think it's 16 and 17 if I look at the ED 279, for the average valuation. For this fiscal year, they used 3 years' worth of valuation. They decided to go back to 2, and that's what's called fiscal capacity. If you were to look at the language that was actually in the vote that was taken last November, the language that was recommended by the lawyers' talks uses the language fiscal capacity, because that's what's used throughout the formula. It's not the annual valuation. Fiscal capacity applies to both within the formula and additional well, actually, some places, additional amount beyond is just done on valuation. When we met the last time this committee, the committee said it was going to apply to both pieces, the actual, what's in the formula and anything above and beyond. That it was going to be consistent, which is what it is now, it's valuation. So I just wanted you to have the history. You can see what the difference is. I would tell you that between a 3-year valuation average and for next year's valuation, and I had a conversation with David today, your valuation went up almost $35 million. Very few places did it help them when the state decided to do 2 years instead of 3. It actually increased the amount of local valuation in most. And I only know that because I teach school finance at UMF in the graduate school, and I make my students take a look at the school funding formula, and one of the pieces they have to look at is valuation. And when I look at it, I'm going, oh. And pretty much everybody in that class and the communities they represent, it's, maybe there's been one community, one district that it did not do that to. So that just shows you that sheet that I just sent you is a historical sheet showing you the valuations for the individual towns. And it's got 2 pages because if you took them apart and take them together, you can see it covers more sheets. And that's a 13-year history. Then, a little easier for me to work with. The top half of the sheet, I just took straight valuation. I wanted to see, just going back like 6 years, how had it changed? There's a little more information than that sheet that I just handed to you. For example, you can see starting back in 2013 for Bethel, it was $435 million of valuation. 2018 is $451,900,000. And you can see the percentages increase every year. Greenwood, you can see the same pattern, Newry, and for Woodstock. And that's just being a kind of a numbers guy. I like to look for trends and patterns and things. The only place that saw some negative numbers were Bethel in 14, 15, and 13. Newry actually saw a negative number in 13, 14. 15 for Woodstock, 16 for, not consistent as such. This is not fiscal capacity, this is the straight valuation. So then at the bottom I said, okay, let's look at the state 2-year average valuation from the ED 279. So, if you look at the first set where it says average 2-year valuation, and it says 2019, 2018, 2018, that's this school fiscal year. We go by whatever the last end of the year is for that, what's what we call it. It's the 2018 school fiscal year. They used a 3-year average. Then look at, for next year, they're using a 2-year average, and you can see the differences with regards to valuation. And in all cases, there was increases. Bethel saw a 2% increase. Newry saw almost a 4% increase. Woodstock almost 2%. Greenwood was a smaller, much smaller, less than 1%. Those are just important to know with regards to how the state of Maine has you go about getting money. Numbers of kids and valuation are the 2 biggest components in that whole funding formula. They play all the way through. Now, there are many other variables in that funding formula, which the state can tweak and did tweak in the last 2 years, and they shift money to different places as such, as you look at the changes. Any questions about this information? Item 7 says, committee members' thoughts and concerns. We've heard a few, yes.
I have a thought and a concern. I would just ask if it could be clarified what my role is. You know, am I supposed to represent the best interest of Greenwood? Am I supposed to come up with a proposal that's likely to pass? Or am I supposed to act in the best interest of the school district?
You're a town representative, right? Right. You're here representing your community.
So I'm supposed to act in the best interest of Greenwood.
But you're here as a committee. I mean, I think that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, well, it's an important thing to clarify because they're very different roles. I think they can be mutually exclusive.
I think they're actually more aligned than first blush might appear, because looking at your community first, whatever the district does impacts your community.
Yeah.
So you're here to be a voice, and if you've got concerns that you think folks in Greenwood would like shared and want to have considered, you should feel free to share those concerns and how that affects your community and how you feel about that. I think at the end, it sort of has to be your, I don't think you're locked in, like if you're on the school board, you don't really represent your communities, you represent the school district in state statute. You are elected, but the minute you are elected, you become a representative on behalf of the state of the children in the district. I think this committee, you were asked to be on this from your community. I think that probably didn't help you at all. I just think I talked right around in a circle. But I do think that what the benefit is to the school district does impact the community.
Thanks.
And I mean, the other piece of that is, and this will come up, if you have a town such as Newry withdraw,
Yeah.
then that has an impact on your community, and is the goal, you know, to keep Newry in the mix, and you know, that was a discussion the last time with regards to, well, if we change it, there are no guarantees, and there were no guarantees as such. I think there's been discussion and there's been some conversation around that, but I do think I would commend the board for taking a look at the structure of the school committee, of the board of directors, and trying to help through that process. It is all a dialogue and it is a process. The issue is to, you know, keep the school system able to function. Yes, sir.
I'm on the school board, and I've spent 6 years on the school board, and this issue has been part of my experience on the board. When I got on the board, I thought it was, I represented the community that I came from, and it took several years to figure out what I was being told, that I didn't represent Bethel. I represented the state of Maine first, and the kids that are in the district. And that was the focus of what we were representing. And there's, it was really pounded, it was really emphasized that what was best for kids is what we were supposed to do first. They did not make any reference to what it cost, what was best for kids and what it cost. And so as a board member, you're constantly trying to figure out how you balance that. The board spent a lot of money to teach us that through attorneys coming in and talking to us and really emphasizing just what I just said. So I think it's important that that everybody understands that as a board member, that's your perspective, that's your point of view. And as we were in board meetings discussing the withdrawal and changing the formula, and just the whole aspect of Newry's, the situation with Newry. As a board member, I felt as though that I was being told by attorneys, and just in general, that our representation of these kids and what was best for those kids is what we kept in mind. It was the first thing we had to do. When I analyzed that, I looked at it if I was just a resident or if I was a board member. And I found myself in conflict with the two entities that I hold as an individual and as a board member. And I think that's kind of important that's my thought, and you said what my thoughts are. And I think that it's important for people to understand that difference as far as being a school board member in the state of Maine versus being like a selectman or a planning board person. Who you're responsible to is different. And the state comes up with all these great ideas and mandates and laws that we're to follow, and then we're charged with funding their mandates. And it's almost as if we're putting our seal of approval on their mandates. And I have to say, as a board member and here sitting in front of you, that I find that conflict again of being a Bethel resident, basically putting a seal of approval on mandates that I just don't understand how any logical politician could put that on the school systems in Maine. So I give that to you, and that's my thought, and the conflict as far as being on this committee and being a board member and a resident.
Appreciate that, thank you. Anything else?
I think public education is probably the most important function that a community can provide for its kids. And I just want to follow up on what Frank said, is more and more we're being mandated to do more with less and less money. And that's essentially the lifeblood of public education, is public money. And that's what we're here to discuss today, is public money. And there aren't many ways to get public money. As I was speaking to the board at the last meeting, I was curious about how much money comes from the state budget, how much from the federal budget for public education. It's not easy to find. You think you could just Google it and find those numbers. Well, the best I could do was for federal and state. The federal was 2%. 2% of the federal budget goes to education. At the state level, it was something like 17.5%. When we talk at the community level, essentially, I believe, at least in Woodstock, it's at least half of each municipal budget. And we're being asked to do more and more. We are now not only educators, we're social workers, we're dealing with kids who have special needs, who are homeless. And the money is coming only from taxpayers in this community. Now, this is what concerns me, because essentially we have to figure out how to maintain that public education if we want the future of our community to be assured. And what concerns me is we just passed the budget. The board did. It's going to go to the voters. The budget was increased approximately $181,000. It's a 2.2% increase.
To the local.
To the local. And so that means that there will be an increase to local taxpayers. Now, when we talk about this cost sharing shift, that means that out of the required local, out of the local share of taxes, that's going to increase. And as well, the amount of this increase is going to increase. So this is what we have to be mindful of, is are the taxpayers going to absorb the regular increase because we're going to shift the formula, and are they going to accept the additional increase of $181,000? Now, in that budget increase included a lot of contracts that we are bound to do by law, teacher contracts. We expanded pre-K. The Finance Committee spent hours and hours and hours cutting and trying to fine-tune and find places in the budget, but it's just the way gravity works, law of gravity, the same thing with budgets. They unfortunately, do go up. Fuel goes up, cost of living goes up. So this is what I want people to be mindful of when they consider a change, because the change, once again, is going to go to local people. And ultimately, what I have struggled with, and what's guided me through the withdrawal efforts, is a strong feeling that the current formula, as we have it, as we've had it for almost 50 years, is the fairest way to do it. And because, yeah, and I'll leave it at that. There is one more thing that is important. I'm sorry. One of the things that's been driving this petition drive and this process is comments that were made, guarantees that were made or implied that NURI would end withdrawal if this cost-sharing committee changed the formula and the voters approved it. I'm still not clear where we are with that, what's been voted on by either the NURI selectmen or the NURI withdrawal committee. That's important because that has been another one of the reasons why we're here, is to basically offer an olive branch and to try to end finally, after so many years, what has been a horribly divisive issue. And I think we need to know that. We need to know exactly where we are. Again, repeating what Mike Cormier said, is that even with those written or votes, there is no legal guarantee. I'm fully aware of that. But to me, at least, seeing some official acknowledgement is important for this committee to know about.
Before we get into the depth of what he was going at, there's just a general information that I think that's important from the board. There's a message coming from the board, is that I don't see any place, I don't see the board's, the energy that the board comes with of doing its work. There is no appetite to really cut programs. If anything, the energy in the board is to do more for kids. You see this in the pre-K, addition to pre-K in our school system, is to deliver more services to our kids, more education, and there's a drive for that. So to think that changing, that we may be able to cut the budget, there's no appetite to go there. If anything, it's the opposite.